The rake never left a wounded body on the field. Not theirs, not ours. That was the first thing the old hands taught you on Halligan Reach, before they taught you how to seat a charge or read the hum. When the rake came through a position, they swept it. After a contact, you would go out under flag dark to recover your people and find the ground already combed. The dead laid in rows by some logic we never cracked. Their own fallen gone entirely, carried off without a trace. Ours arranged face up, hands folded at the sides, boots together, as if the field itself had been offended by the mess and had set about making it tidy. I have spent a long time trying to explain that to people who were not there. The closest I ever got was this: they took care of the dead because to them, the dead were the only honest thing on the battlefield. Everything else was waste they intended to correct. I was a sapper, 41 when the Reach fell, which made me old for the work and older for the war. My job was charges and structure, the slow, patient business of deciding what holds and what comes down and exactly when. I had hands that did not shake, which is the one thing that matters in my trade, and a reputation for being the woman you wanted on the demolition order and the woman you did not want at a wake. Both were earned. We held a tower, 40 decks of port habitat ringed in salvage plate, bolted to a ridge above the only deepwater port the colony had left. The engineers who built it had a name for it on the schematics that nobody used. To us it was the stack. You lived your whole tour going up and down the stack, because the lifts had failed in the second year and we never had the parts to fix them, so the entire war for me became a thing measured in stairwells. Resupply was stairs. Casualty evac was stairs. The dead came down on your back, one flight at a time, and you learned to hate the 7th landing of every flight because that was where your legs started lying to you about how much was left. I tell you about the stairs because they matter later. Everything I am going to tell you about the stairs matters later. The Rake came up the coast in the dry season. We had been fighting them for 3 years by then, and we still did not have a real word for what they were. The Xeno people back at anchor had a taxonomy full of Latin that nobody on the line ever spoke aloud. We called them the Rake because of what they did to a field, and because the name fit the way they moved, long, pale, many-jointed, taller than a man when they stood full but rarely standing full, going low and fast and even, 100 of them crossing open ground with the unanimity of a single comb dragged across sand. They did not shout. They did not break and run. They had a signal between them that our gear picked up as a low chord, a hum you felt in the fillings of your teeth before you heard it, and when the chord changed they all changed with it. No orders, no hesitation, no man falling behind because his nerve gave out, because they had no nerve to give out, because whatever they were they had solved the problem of fear by deleting it. Here is the thing that took me 3 years to understand, and that I think is the only thing worth understanding about them at all. They did not retreat to save their wounded. They did not slow for the injured. If one of them went down and could not rise, the ones beside it did not stop. They flowed around it the way water goes around a stone, and later, when the field was theirs, they came back and took the body, and we never once saw what they did with it. A rake that could not keep up was already gone from the cord. It was already, in whatever way they reckon such things, dead. We watched them leave their own behind 1,000 times, and we hated them for it more than we hated them for killing us, because killing us we understood. Soldiers kill soldiers, but a thing that would not carry its own, that was a kind of cold we did not have a place for. I saw it up close exactly once early, before I learned not to volunteer for recovery details. We had lost a forward picket, 8 troopers under a kid lieutenant whose name I have made myself forget, and when the rake pulled back off that ground, we went out to bring our people home. The field was clean. That is the word that keeps coming and the word that is wrong, because clean is a thing you want, and this was a thing that wanted you. 8 troopers laid in a row on ground that had been churned to slurry by the fighting, and the slurry around each of them smoothed flat, deliberately, the way you smooth a sheet over someone, and their hands folded and their faces turned up to a sky none of them could see. Their weapons stacked at the foot of the row, barrels together, as if the rake had decided the guns were part of the set and ought to match. And not one rake body anywhere on a field where I had personally watched at least a dozen of them go down. Gone, all of them, carried off, leaving ours arranged like an offering to a god that did not exist. I knelt in that slurry beside the kid lieutenant, and I could not make my hands undo what the rake had done, could not unfold those folded hands, and I understood for the first time that I was fighting a thing that grieved nothing and tidied everything, and that those are the same sentence said two ways. I had a place for it as it happens. I had spent 2 years building that place, but I am getting ahead. There were maybe 200 of us in the stack when the dry season turned. We had been more. Fallon was still with us then, my sister, 3 years younger and twice as sensible, a comms tech who had transferred up from Anchor against every reasonable instinct because she would not let me hold the line without her in earshot. She spent the whole of that last month trying to talk me down off the tower. Fall back to the inner ring, she said. The inner ring was the cluster of habdomes behind the second wall, the safe sprawl where the support staff and the relief rotated and the lightly wounded lived in something almost like a town. It had real beds and recycled coffee and a chapel and a smell that was not cordite. Fallon wanted me there. Come down to the ring, Fran, she would say on the private channel late when she thought I was tired enough to listen. You have done your share and a dozen other people's. Let the young ones hold the wall. Come where it is quiet. I never went. I want to be honest about why, because it was not all valor. Some of it was that I did not know who I was anywhere but on a wall. Some of it was spite, the plain animal refusal to be moved by anything that wanted to move me. And some of it, the part I am least proud of, was that I had already decided the reach was going to fall, and I wanted to be standing on it when it did, because the alternative was sitting in a quiet dome in the ring listening to it fall over the radio. I had done that once before, the listening. I will get to that too. Layla held the deck below mine. She was a gun captain, loud, generous, the kind of soldier who borrowed your rations and remembered it and paid you back double, the kind who could make a sandbag line laugh on the worst morning of its life. Layla and I had a thing we said. If it ever came apart, if the stack ever broke and the order was every soul for itself, we would go for each other first. Not for the wall, not for the brass, for each other. We said it the way you say a thing you are certain you will never be held to. I believed it when I said it. I want that on the record. I believed her and I believed myself. Janet ran the aid post on the 9th deck. She was a field medic with a surgeon's hands and a quartermaster's heart, which is to say she would lie, steal, and threaten a colonel to keep one of her wounded breathing. And she did, more than once. Lawrence was my second on the demolition crew, a slow, soft-spoken man who had been a structural mason before the war, and who treated every charge we set like a small funeral, which is exactly the attitude you want in a man handling that much current. And there was a kid, Veasley, 19, who did his calisthenics on the open deck every dawn no matter the shelling, push-ups, and the count out loud, because his father had done them and his father's father, and he had decided that the morning he stopped was the morning the rake had already won. We mocked him for it. We also, every one of us, listened for the count, and on the mornings it came we felt better, and on the mornings it did not we checked the casualty board first thing. That is what a routine is, out there. It is a way of telling each other you are still alive without having to say it. That was my tower. 200 souls, a dead lift, 40 flights of stairs, and a coastline full of a thing that took better care of the dead than it ever did of its own living. And then there was Devon, who was not on my tower at all. And who is the reason I am telling you any of this? 2 years before the Reach fell in the Gray campaign, I kept a man alive who should have died. The Gray was a contaminated push, a corridor of old colony works where the shielding had failed and the air itself was a slow poison, and we lost more men to the corridor than to the enemy in it. There is a marrow sickness you get from the Gray. The medics called it attrition rot, which is a clean name for a filthy way to go. It eats you from the inside on a schedule. First the strength, then the appetite, then the blood will not clot, then the marrow simply forgets how to make more of you, and you lie there going gray as the works that did it to you, and there is no cure, only time and care, and most men do not get enough of either. Devon got the rot in the 3rd week of the gray. By rights he should have gone to the dying tent and gone quiet inside a month, because that is what the rot does, and that is what the triage protocol said to do with it. Since a man with attrition rot is a man you are spending good plasma and good hands on for an outcome the actuary already wrote down. I read the protocol. I did not care for it. Devon had pulled me out of a flooded sap 2 months earlier with his bare hands and a length of deck cord, had held my head above the water and talked nonsense at me for 40 minutes until the relief came, and I had decided in that flooded dark that whatever I owed the war, I owed that man separately and in full. So I kept him alive, not for a week, for 2 years. When the rot put him on his back, I carried his rations to him and made him eat them, made him, hand on his jaw some nights like he was a child refusing soup. When the marrow quit and he needed transfusion, I gave my own blood across a cot until the medic told me I would go down beside him if I gave another drop, and then I argued, and then I gave another drop. I learned his sickness the way you learn a trade. I learned which nights he could keep food and which nights I should not bother, learned the gray hour before dawn when men with the rot tend to let go, and learned to be sitting beside him through every one of those hours so that he would have to let go in front of me, which he was too stubborn and too ashamed to do. There was a night near the worst of it, the marrow all but gone, when he asked me to stop. "Just stop, Fran," he said, "go to your cot, I am tired of being a thing you carry." And I told him no. I told him I had not asked his permission to keep him alive, and I was not going to start now. And I held his wrist where I could feel the thin, scared jump of his pulse. And I talked at him about nothing. About a tower I had once dropped clean into its own footprint. About the 7th landing of every flight of stairs, about anything. Until the gray hour passed and the pulse held and the morning came and he was still in it, hatting me, breathing. That is what care is when it is real and not a word. It is refusing to take the no. 2 years. I gave that man 2 years out of the middle of my one life, and I do not say that to make myself sound good, because there were days I hated him for it, days I sat by his cot composing the speech I would give at his service so that the time would not be a total waste. I say it because it is the shape of the thing. 2 years of my hands, that was the debt, and I was the one who held the paper. He lived. Against the protocol and the actuary and the rot itself, the marrow remembered, and Devon walked out of the gray on his own legs, thin as a rail and gray at the temples at 30, and the first thing he did with his life that I had spent 2 years buying back for him was to take a posting at Anchor. I do not want to make him a coward in your eyes. He was not a coward. He had earned a rest and he took it, the way a man crawling out of a flooded sap takes air, in great selfish gulps, not thinking about anyone still under. Anchor was the deep rear, the supply heart, the place the war was administered rather than fought. He had a head for logistics, it turned out, a real gift for it, and within a year he had made himself indispensable to the people who counted beans, and they gave him a commendation and a billet and a partner and a life with a roof that did not leak and a door that locked, and he stopped answering the channel. Not all at once. The way a debt stops getting paid is never all at once. First, the replies got short. Then they got slow. Then there was a stretch where I told myself he was just busy. And then there was a longer stretch where I stopped telling myself anything, because I had a wall to hold and no time to spend grieving a man I had personally kept from dying. His partner was a woman named Jody, a logistics officer at Anchor, sharp and territorial, and not, I came to think later, entirely wrong about me. She saw me the way the comfortable always see the debt the comfortable owe, as a threat, as a draft that might come due and take from her the man she had built her quiet life around. I met her exactly once on a supply rotation, and she was perfectly civil and watched me the whole time the way you watch a creditor, and I understood that to Jody I was not a person at all. I was a bill Devon had not paid, walking around in a sapper's coat. So that was the board when the dry season turned. My tower, my people, my sister telling me to come down to the quiet, a coastline full of the Rake, and 100 kilometers behind all of it, in a dome that did not leak. A man who owed me 2 years and had decided the simplest way to settle the account was to pretend he had never opened it. The Rake hit the stack on the 9th day of the assault, in the gray hour, which I have always thought they chose on purpose, because they had been watching us long enough to know it was the hour men let go. I will not give you the whole battle. Most of it is the kind of thing that means nothing to anyone who was not in it and everything to everyone who was, and the people who were in it are mostly dead, so it would be a story told to no one. I will give you the part that matters. They came up the seaward face in numbers we had not seen, the chord so loud that morning it set the loose plates singing on every deck, and they did not bother with the lower works the way they had every time before. They went for the spine. They had finally understood the tower, 3 years, and they had finally read the stack the way I read a structure, and they went for the load-bearing core, the central run of stairwell and conduit that held the whole 40 decks plumb. I felt it before the alarm caught up, felt it in my feet, that wrongness in a structure that a sapper feels the way a sailor feels a wave that is not like the others. I keyed the channel and I said, the core, they are in the core, get off the high decks, and I started down to set the charges that would seal the spine and trap them in it. I got as far as the 22nd deck. I had Lawrence with me and a satchel of the good charges and a plan that would have worked, that I am still certain would have worked when the Rake brought down the section above us. Not us, above us. They cut the spine 4 decks up and 40 floors of port habitat came off true and folded. And the part of it that was the 22nd deck stopped being a floor and became a thing falling. And I had perhaps half a second of clear thought in which I shoved Lawrence into the lee of a structural pier and did not have time to follow him. A bulkhead the size of a gun carriage came across my legs, both of them below the knee, and my left arm at the elbow where I had thrown it up out of the animal instinct that your arm can stop a building, which it cannot. The pain came later. At first there was only the sound, which I cannot describe except to say it was the sound of the war ending my war, the specific war that had been mine, all of it coming down in one breath of grinding dark. And then a silence so total I thought I had died. And then Lawrence's voice somewhere in the dust saying my name, saying it like a question, like he was not sure he wanted the answer. I was pinned on the 22nd deck of a tower that had just lost its core. My legs were under a bulkhead I could not have shifted with both arms whole, and I did not have both arms whole. The stairwell I had spent 3 years heading was gone, not blocked, gone, sheared away into the gulf where the spine used to be, so that the deck I lay on now ended in open air 22 flights above the rocks. There was no way down. There had never been a way down but the stairs, and the stairs were sky now. And I was, in the language of the protocol I had read 2 years before over a different cot, no longer worth the cost of recovery. I knew it the moment I understood where I was. That is the thing about being the one who reads structures and reads protocols. You do your own triage before anyone else gets the chance, and you do it honestly, because lying to yourself about a load is how a sapper dies. I lay there in the dust doing the math on myself the way I would do it on a charge, and the math came out clean and cold. One sapper, badly maimed, pinned, on a severed deck with no access, in a tower that was actively falling to an enemy that swept the wounded off the board as a matter of biology. The cost to reach me was a recovery team and a flight asset and time, in a battle where we had none of the three. The expected return was one crippled 41-year-old woman who would never seat a charge again. The actuary I had spent my whole career arguing with would not even have to think about it. Leave her. Hold what you can. She knew the cost when she put on the coat. Lawrence would not leave. I have to tell you that because he is one of the ones who paid. He got to me through the dust and he saw the bulkhead across my legs and his slow, soft face did a thing I had never seen it do. And he started trying to lift the unliftable with his bare hands, the way you do, the way everyone does, because the body refuses the math even when the mind has finished it. I made him stop. I made him take the satchel of charges, because the charges could still seal a deck and save the people below. And I made him go down the only way left, the maintenance run on the far side that the rake had not cut. And he went, weeping. A 50-year-old mason weeping going down a ladder with a bag of explosives. Because I ordered him to, and because I was right, and because being right is sometimes the cruelest thing you can do to a man who loves you. Then I was alone on the 22nd deck with the cord rising again below me, and I got the comms unit out of my coat with my good hand, and I keyed it, and I did the one thing I had sworn for 2 years I would never do. I called Layla first. I want to be fair to myself. I called Layla first because of the thing we had said for each other first, and the channel opened and I heard her. I heard her breathing. I heard the gunfire around her. And I said, Layla, it is Fran, I am pinned on 22, the stairs are gone. And there was a silence that I have spent the rest of my life inside of. And then Layla said, in a voice I did not recognize, a voice that had already done its own math, Fran, I can't. The deck's coming apart. I've got 11 kids here and I can't get up to you. I'm sorry, and the channel closed. And I understood that the thing we had said to each other was a thing people say, and that I had built 2 years of certainty on it. And that certainty is the cheapest thing in the world to give away when nothing is being asked of you, and the most expensive thing in the world to keep when something is. I do not hate Layla. She had 11 kids on that deck and she got 9 of them out, and she was not lying about the math. But she had said for each other first, and when first came she chose the 9, and she was right too, and it broke something in me that has never set straight. I called Fallen. My sister came on instantly. She had been screaming my call sign on the net since the spine went, and when she heard my voice she made a sound I will not try to write down. Fran, where are you? Tell me where you are. And I told her, and I heard her go quiet. I heard her doing the same math everyone was doing. The math she did better than anyone because she could see the whole net, every asset, every flight already tasked. And I heard her find the same answer the actuary found. And my sister, who had spent a month begging me to come down to the quiet, said the only thing left to say, which was come down, Fran. There has to be a way down. And I said there is no way down, Fal. The stairs are sky. And she started to argue with the architecture of the building as if love could change a load path. And I had to talk my own sister out of throwing herself at a recovery that did not exist. I told her to hold the ring. I told her I was all right, which was the only lie I ever told her, and she knew it was a lie and she let me tell it, which is its own kind of mercy. Then I told her to clear the channel. She would not. I told her again. She cleared it. The last thing she said was my name, just my name, the way Lawrence had said it, like a question nobody wanted answered. And then, with the cord coming up the broken spine and the dust still falling and my legs somewhere under a building, I called Devon at anchor, 100 kilometers behind the war, and called in 2 years. It took him a long time to answer. Long enough that I had decided he would not, and had begun, God help me, to make my peace with the cold arithmetic of it. That the one man in the universe who owed me my own life back would let the account close with me under a bulkhead 22 flights up. Then the channel opened and there was the sound of anchor behind him, the impossible sound of a place that was not on fire, the hum of recyclers and the murmur of people whose worst problem that morning was a supply manifest. And Devon said my name in a careful voice, a voice that already knew because of course he knew. The net was screaming the stacks fall to the whole sector, and he said, Fran, what can I do? And there was a thing under the words, a wariness, a man bracing for a bill. I told him where I was. I told him the math, flatly, the way I would tell it to anyone, because I am a sapper and I do not dress a load. Pinned on 22, both legs, one arm, no access, tower falling, rake in the spine. I told him I knew what it cost to come for me, and I told him I knew nobody was coming. And then I said the thing I had carried for 2 years, the thing I had sworn I would die before I said. And I said it because I was, in point of fact, about to die. And a person about to die gets to say one true thing. I said I gave you 2 years. I sat through every gray hour you had. I gave you my blood until the medic pulled me off you. You walked out of the gray on legs I paid for, and you have not answered this channel in a year, and you owe me, Devon. You owe me, and I am calling it. Come and get me. There was a silence on the line, and inside the silence I could hear another voice, a woman's, sharp, close to the unit, and I knew it was Jody, and I could not make out the words, but I did not need to, because I had heard that exact tone from her once before across a supply table. It is not fair, the tone said. It is not your debt anymore. You have a life, you have a roof, you have me. You do not owe that woman your death just because she gave you her years. And the worst of it, the thing I have never been able to forgive her for and have never been able to argue with, is that she was right. It was not fair. I was asking a man to come die for a debt, and there is no actuary in the world that would call that a fair trade. Devon did not answer for a long time, and then he said, in a voice gone strange and thin, the voice I remembered from the gray hours when he could not keep food, "Fran, that's not," and I cut him off. I did not let him say it was not fair. I knew it was not fair. I said, I'm not asking you to be fair. I'm asking you to be the man I kept alive. And I closed the channel because I did not want to hear his answer, because his answer was going to be no. And I had had enough of being right about the people I loved for one morning. For a while I just lay there and listened to the tower die under me. You learn a building's voice when you spend 3 years deciding how to kill it, and the stack was talking the whole way down, the long groan of a load finding a new path, the sharp report of a tie failing, the patient grinding settle of 40 decks redistributing themselves around a wound in the spine. Underneath all of it, climbing the cord. They were sweeping the decks below me one at a time, unhurried, thorough, and I could chart their progress by the sounds that stopped. The gunfire on the lower decks went quiet floor by floor, not in the ragged way a fight ends, but in the even way a hand turns off a row of lights, and I knew that each silence was a deck the Rake had finished tidying, and I knew the arithmetic of it would arrive at my deck eventually, and I lay there and let myself be afraid of it for exactly as long as I judged I could afford, which was not very long. Then I lay in the dust and I did what a sapper does. I went to work. I want to tell you about the next 4 hours, because the next 4 hours are the part of this that I am proud of, the part that is mine, the part that no debt and no rescue can take credit for. I was pinned and I was bleeding and I was alone, and I decided I was not going to die quiet, and I had with me the one thing the Rake had never managed to take from us, which was a human being's bottomless willingness to make a mess. The cord was coming up the spine. They would reach my deck. I could not move my legs and I could barely move my left arm, but my right hand worked and my mind worked, and I had, scattered in the wreckage within reach, the makings of a sapper's last argument. I had 2 of the good charges that had spilled from the satchel when Lawrence took it. I had a spool of deck cord. I had my sidearm and a structural sense of the deck I lay on that was as precise as a blueprint, because I had walked it 1,000 times on the way up and down, heading every flight. I knew that the only way onto my deck now was the same severed gap the spine had left, a throat of broken structure the Rake would have to funnel through to reach me. I knew that throat the way I knew my own hands, and I knew, because I had spent 3 years watching them, that the Rake did not improvise. The cord made them one thing, and a thing that is one thing cannot do 2 things at once. They came in the pattern the cord set, even and unanimous and utterly without the human capacity for the sudden stupid individual idea. That unanimity was their great strength. I lay there with my legs under a building, and I decided to make it the thing that killed them. I rigged the throat. It took me 4 hours on my back with one hand, dragging deck cord across a deck a centimeter at a time, biting it, seating the 2 charges in the structure where I knew the load ran, where a sapper would put them to drop exactly that section and nothing else, timed not to the moment they entered, but to the moment the pattern committed, the moment the cord had enough of them in the throat that they could not flow back out. I was betting my death on a single trait. I was betting that they would come the way they always came, all together, all at once, trusting the cord. Because a thing that has deleted fear has also deleted caution, and caution is just fear that learned a trade. It is a strange thing to build your own gallows and take pride in the joinery, but that is what those 4 hours were. My legs were gone below the knee in any way that mattered, and the cold had started in them, the deep cold that is the body-giving ground, and I worked through it the way you work through everything, by making the next small correct motion and refusing to look at the size of the thing. Seat the charge. Mind the load path. Bite the cord, draw it, set it. A centimeter, another. My right hand cramped into a claw and I beat it open against the deck and kept on. Twice I went somewhere else for a while. Not asleep, just gone, and came back with the cord still in my teeth and no memory of the minutes between. And each time I came back I was certain Devon was sitting beside me in the dust the way I had once sat beside him. And each time the dust was empty. And each time I went back to work anyway, because the work did not need him to be real. Somewhere in there I stopped being afraid. I do not say that to sound hard. Fear is a thing that needs a future to live in, and I had set my future down to about 10 meters of broken structure and a numb thumb on a trigger, and when your future gets that small the fear has nowhere left to stand. And while I worked, somewhere 100 kilometers behind me, I learned later, a man was having an argument with his own life. I did not see this part. I have pieced it together from Devon and from Jody, who I will say this for. She told me the truth about it afterward, every ugly word, when she did not have to. Devon went to the flight line at Anchor and tried to requisition a bird and a crew, and they refused him because there was no recovery tasking for the stack, because the stack was a write-off, because the actuary had already closed the book on every soul still on it, including a sapper named Marrow who was officially listed. By then, as killed in action, structure collapse, recovery not feasible. He argued. He had no standing to argue. He was a logistics officer. He had not flown into anything in 2 years. He had a desk and a commendation and a partner who was at that moment telling him he had lost his mind. And Jody told me she said to him, in the worst moment of their life together, "You do not owe her this. You paid that debt by living. That's what she gave you the years for, to live, not to throw the life away the first time she calls." And Devon told me he said the truest thing he ever said to her, which was, "She didn't give me the years so I'd live. She gave me the years because that's what you do for your own." And I forgot that. I let myself forget that for a year because remembering it costs something, and I'm not going to forget it on the morning she's dying. He stole the bird. I want to be precise because Devon was court-martialed for it later and I sat in the proceeding, and I will not soften it. He did not requisition the bird. He took it. He talked a young pilot named. It does not matter what her name was. She was 19. She did Veasley's same morning push-ups in a different uniform. The war was full of those kids. He talked her into the cockpit of a CaseVac flyer that was tasked to a different sector, and the two of them lifted without clearance and flew 100 kilometers into a falling tower against a standing order. For a debt, which is to say for nothing the actuary could price, which is to say for the one reason human beings have ever done anything that mattered. I knew none of that. On my deck the chord changed. I felt it before I heard it, the way you always did, the shift in the hum that meant the pattern had committed, that they were coming up the throat in the unanimous flood that was the only way they knew how to come. I had the trigger in my good hand. I had been holding it for an hour and my thumb had gone numb on it. I lay in the dust and I watched the throat fill with that pale segmented motion, that horrible even tide of them coming for the wounded thing on the deck, coming the way they always came for the wounded, because to the Rake a wounded thing was simply waste that had not yet been corrected. And I waited. I waited past the point that every nerve in me screamed to fire. I waited until the throat was full, until they were committed, until the cord had enough of them inside the load path that they could not flow back out the way they had flowed around their own dying for 3 years. Then I corrected the waste. The charges did exactly what I built them to do. I dropped the throat. 40 tons of severed structure came down into that funnel of them and took the whole committed flood off the board in a single second. And the cord, I will remember this until I die, the cord broke. Not went quiet. Broke. The hum that had set the plate singing every morning of the war shattered into a sound I had never heard from them. A discord. The sound of a thing that is one thing suddenly discovering it is many things, and that some of them are gone. They did not know what to do. For the first time in 3 years, the rake on that face of the stack did not know what to do, because the thing they had committed to had folded under them, and they had no individual minds to fall back on, only the cord, and the cord was screaming. That was the turn. I want to be honest about what the turn was, because it would be a lie to say one maimed sapper with a spool of dead cord beat the rake. I did not beat them. What I did was prove a thing about them, the thing I had spent 3 years watching and finally understood lying under a building, that a creature which will not stop for its own wounded has no script for an enemy who will not stop coming for theirs. Their whole way of war was built on the assumption that the wounded are written off, by them and by us, by everyone, because that is what is efficient, that is what the actuary says. They had read us correctly for 3 years. They had watched us calculate the cost of the broken and leave them, because mostly, God help us, that is what we did, because the math is the math. And the one thing their model could not hold, the one input that made the cord scream, was a wounded human being who was not waiting to be written off, but was lying in the dust building a trap with one hand. And behind her, screaming in over the seaward face against every standing order, a casevac flyer with a logistics officer and a 19-year-old in it. Coming for one woman the entire war had agreed was not worth the fuel. Devon came over the rocks at deck height, the flyer's engines hammering the broken face of the stack, and he found me by the only landmark left, the fresh collapse where I had dropped the throat, because he knew, he told me later, that the woman he was looking for would mark her own position with the corpses of the things that came for her. He could not land. There was nothing left to land on. So he did the thing that got him his court-martial commuted later by a board that could not quite bring itself to hang a man for it, which was hold that flyer in a hover off a falling tower, while his 19-year-old pilot fought the wind and the heat bloom off the wreck. And he came out on the line himself, Devon, the desk man, the logistics officer, the man I had kept alive for 2 years, came out on a recovery line into a position that was actively coming apart. To cut a bulkhead off the legs of the only person who had ever spent 2 years of her life on him. It took both of us. It took the flyer's winch and a cutting torch in Devon's hands and my one good hand, and a span of time in which the rest of the stack finished falling around us, deck by deck, the war I had known ending in real time 40 floors at a stretch. Devon worked the torch one-handed with his other arm hooked through the line, and the cut took forever, the bulkhead glowing and spitting, and the smell of it filling what was left of the deck. And twice the structure shifted under us, and twice he threw his body over mine without thinking about it. A man who counted beans for a living shielding a sapper from a building with nothing but his own back. I lay there under him doing the only thing I had left to do, which was hold the lift cable steady so the winch had something true to pull against. We did not speak much. There was not much to say and no breath to say it with. Once, when the bulkhead finally gave and my ruined legs came free, and the pain arrived all at once like a bill that had been accruing for hours, I made a sound I am not proud of, and Devon put his gray dust-streaked face down close to mine and said, "Easy, I've got you. I've got you." And I held onto those 3 words the way I had once made him hold onto a spoon. The cord was reforming below. They always reformed. You could not break them for long, only for long enough. And I lay there with the bulkhead coming off my ruined legs, and I looked up at Devon's face, gray at the temples at 32 now, streaked with the dust of my collapsing tower. And I did not say thank you, and he did not say sorry, because the 2 of us were past the place where those words mean anything. He just got an arm under me, the way I had gotten an arm under him 1,000 gray mornings in the gray. And he said, in the careful voice, "I've got you," the same 3 words I had said to him on the worst nights of his sickness. "I've got you," and he carried me to the line. The cost. I told you I would pay the bill, and the war always sends the bill. The 19-year-old pilot did not survive the lift out. A heat bloom off the burning core caught the flyer as we cleared the face, and she lost it, fought it, got it level long enough for the winch to haul us aboard, and then could not get it level again. And she put that machine down in the shallows off the port with a control that cost her everything she had. And Devin and I went into the water and were pulled out by a port crew, and she did not come out. She was 19. She did Veasley's push-ups in a different uniform. I never learned whether she did them out loud. Lawrence got the lower deck sealed with the charges I sent him down with, and saved I do not know how many, and I never saw him again, because the maintenance run he went down collapsed behind him, and he came out on the wrong side of the wall into the falling part, and he is one of the rows the Rake tidied. They laid him out face up, hands folded, boots together, and that is how the recovery teams found him a week later when the line stabilized. My slow, soft Mason, made tidy by the thing he died fighting. Layla lived. She got her 9 kids out and she lived, and she found me in the hospital at the inner ring 2 weeks later, and she stood at the foot of the bed and she could not say anything, and neither could I. And what we had said to each other once for each other first sat in the room between us like a third person nobody wanted to introduce. I do not hate her. I have tried to, and I cannot. She made the math everyone makes, and she saved 9 children with it, and the only thing she got wrong was the same thing we all get wrong, which is that you can swear a thing in the easy dark and have it cost nothing, and then the dark turns hard and the thing comes due, and you find out what you are actually made of, and it is almost never what you swore. I found out what I was made of on that deck. Layla found out what she was made of 1 floor down. Neither of us got to choose the morning we found out. I have made my peace with her. It is not the peace we had before, but it is a peace, and at our age you take the peace you can get. Fallen, my sister, was at the inner ring when they brought me in. She did not say "I told you so," though she had told me so for a month, told me to come down to the quiet, and the war had finally brought me down to the quiet on a stretcher missing most of 2 legs and part of an arm. She sat by the bed through the gray hours, every one of them the way I had sat by Devin's, the way Devin had sat by mine on the flyer, and somewhere in there I understood that this was the only thing we knew how to do for each other, our whole sad, stubborn species, the only weapon we ever had that actually worked. We sit by the bed. We come up the stairs. We hold the line off the dying so the dying do not have to die alone. It is not efficient. The actuary hates it. It cost a 19-year-old her life and a Mason his, and very nearly cost a logistics officer everything he had rebuilt. And it has never once shown up on the right side of any ledger anyone has ever kept. And it is the only reason there is anyone left to keep the ledger at all. Devin was court-martialed for the theft of the flyer and the death of the pilot. I testified. I told the board everything I have told you about the gray, about the 2 years, about the debt, and the board did the math the way boards do, and found that he had stolen a military asset and gotten a child killed, all of which was true, and then they looked at the thing the whole proceeding could not look away from, which was that the Rake had broken on the seaward face of the stack for the first time in 3 years on the exact morning. A man flew 100 kilometers against orders to recover 1 written-off sapper, and that the line had held at the inner ring partly because of it, and that something in the way we had refused the math had put a crack in the cord that the whole sector was now trying to learn how to make on purpose. They could not hang him. They could not honor him. So they did the thing armies do when they cannot decide, which is bury it in a commuted sentence and a sealed file, and Devin walked out of the proceeding a man with a record and a dead pilot and a debt finally, terribly paid, and he and I have not spoken much since, because what would we say? We are square now. That is a strange and lonely place to arrive at with a person, the place where the account is finally settled. I do not recommend reaching it. But I do not regret a single hour I spent buying him the years, not even now, not even knowing what they cost when they came due. Jody left him. I will not pretend that was not partly my doing, the bill I represented finally crashing through the roof of the quiet life she had built. She told me, the one time we spoke afterward, that she could not be with a man who would always, in the end, choose the debt over the roof. And I told her the only true thing I had for her, which was that she was right, and that she should be glad of it, because a man who will not choose the debt over the roof is a man who will leave you on a falling deck the day the math turns against you. And she did not thank me for it, and I did not expect her to. I never ceded another charge. The legs they built me are good ones. The inner ring fabricators do fine work, but a sapper's whole trade is in the hands and the balance and the certainty, and I lost the certainty under that bulkhead along with the rest. I train the young ones now. I teach them load paths and timing and how to read a structure the way you read a face. And there is one thing I teach them that is not in any manual, that I make them learn before I let them touch a charge. And it is the thing I learned lying under a building on the 22nd deck of a tower that no longer exists. I tell them about the Rake. I tell them the Rake will beat you on every count that can be counted. They are faster. They are unanimous. They do not fear and do not tire and do not grieve, and they will read your every reasonable calculation correctly, because your reasonable calculations are the most predictable thing about you. And then I tell them the one place the Rake cannot follow, the one input that broke the cord on the seaward face. And it is this: the Rake takes care of its dead because the dead are finished and safe to honor. We take care of our wounded who are not finished, who are inconvenient, who are expensive, who are still capable of costing us everything. That is the whole of it. That is the entire difference between them and us, and it is the only edge we have ever had that they cannot take, because to take it they would have to become us, and the morning they become us is the morning they lose. The Reach fell. I want to be clear about that. We did not win. The stack is rubble and the coast is theirs, and the war ground on for years after in places I was no longer well enough to go. I am not telling you a story about how we won. I am telling you a story about why, when everything that could be counted said leave her, a man came up a falling tower anyway, and a thing that had deleted fear and caution and grief heard its own cord break for the first time, and learned, too late to do it any good, what it had walked into. They never understood why we slowed down for the dying. They thought it was a flaw. For 3 years they watched us pay for our wounded in blood we could not spare, and they filed it as a weakness to exploit. And they exploited it, and it cost us, God. It cost us. It cost a mason and a pilot and most of 2 of my legs. But that slowing down was the whole reason any of us were still standing on the morning the cord broke. The thing they read as our weakness was the thing they could not kill, because it was not a tactic and not a calculation and not a flaw. It was just what we do for our own. We come up the stairs. We sit by the bed. We hold the line off the dying so they do not die alone. I have a bad leg and a worse one and an arm that aches before rain, and I am old, and the war is somewhere else now. And most mornings the only thing I hold the line against is the cold. But every dawn, out of a habit I cannot break and would not if I could, I listen for a count that has not come in years. A kid's voice doing push-ups on an open deck, telling the rest of us he was still alive without having to say it. I never hear it. I listen anyway. That is the trade I have decided. That is the whole of what we are, under everything, the part the Rake could read and the part it never could. We are the thing that keeps listening for the count, long after there is no one left to make it.